"I would sooner marry my horse," said Julian Ashcombe, Duke of Kestrelmore, and he did not trouble to lower his voice. The words carried the length of the long gallery, past the marble busts of his ancestors, past the tall windows where the March light lay thin and grey, and struck the woman standing near the door as surely as a slap. He knew they had struck her. He saw the small flinch of her shoulders, the way her gloved hands folded one over the other, and he told himself it did not matter. His aunt had brought her here without his leave, thrust her at him like a merchant hawking cloth, and he despised being managed. "She is the daughter of a gentleman," Lady Marcham said, her fan snapping shut. "Rosalind Hartley is well-bred, well-read, and not without means. You are 38, Julian. You have no hair, no wife, and a temper that has frightened off every eligible woman in 3 counties. I am doing you a kindness. You are doing me an insult." He turned from the window at last and looked at the woman his aunt had chosen. She was younger than he, perhaps 25, with dark hair drawn simply back and a plain grey travelling gown that had seen better seasons. Her face was not the fashionable kind, too grave, too still, the mouth too wide. But her eyes, when they lifted to meet his, did not drop the way other women's eyes dropped. They held. That more than anything annoyed him. "Miss Hartley, you have wasted a journey. I have no intention of marrying, and if I had, I should not choose a bride the way I choose a hunter, by having her walked before me in a corridor." He expected her to redden and stammer, or to weep, or to flee. He had reduced grander women than she to all 3. Instead, Rosalind Hartley inclined her head, calm as a churchyard. "Then we are agreed, your grace, for I have no wish to marry a man who compares a lady to a horse and finds the horse the better bargain. I came because Lady Marcham asked it of me, and because I did not think it kind to refuse a lonely old woman a hope. I did not come to be bought." She looked at him a moment longer, and there was no anger in her face, only a sort of weary understanding that was worse than anger. "I hope you find your health, sir. You look as though you have not slept." And she gathered her shawl and walked from the gallery, unhurried, leaving him standing with a retort dead on his tongue. Lady Marcham was smiling. He did not care for the smile. "You look as though you have not slept," she repeated softly. "She saw it in 10 minutes, Julian, when your own physician takes an hour. Think on that." He did not think on it. He had a great deal of practice in not thinking on things. He rang for his steward, gave orders about the spring drainage on the eastern fields, and by evening had all but forgotten the grave-eyed woman in grey. Kestrelmore was a vast house, 400 years of Ashcombe pride raised in golden stone above the moor, and its master had learned long ago that the surest way to survive it was to fill his days with iron purpose and let no one close enough to be lost. His father had died raging at a war. His mother had faded in a distant wing, forgotten. His younger brother, Thomas, the only creature Julian had ever loved without measure, had drowned at 19 crossing a flooded ford, and Julian had been the one to carry him home. He had wept then. He had sworn, standing over that small cold body, that he would never let himself be so unmade again. Grief was a country he had crossed once and would not enter twice. So he built his walls. He was hard where hardness served, generous only in ways that could be counted in coin, and he had a reputation across the north that mothers used to frighten idle daughters. The Duke of Kestrelmore, who buried his heart with his brother and never dug it up again. He did not know that grey March evening that he was already ill. He had felt it for a week, a heaviness behind the eyes, an ache that sat in the joints like damp in old timber, a chill that no fire could quite reach. He put it down to the season, to a hard ride in cold rain, to the poor sleep his aunt had noted. Men of his rank did not sicken, they had no time for it. So he ignored the way the ache deepened, and rode out 3 mornings running to inspect the flooded fields. And on the 4th morning he did not so much dismount from his horse as fall from it, and had to be helped, grey-faced and shaking, back into the house. By nightfall the fever had him fast. For 2 days he burned. The great chamber where 5 dukes had died closed around him like a fist. He heard voices at a great distance, his valet, his steward, the physicians sent for from York, all of them speaking of him as though he were already a matter of estate business rather than a living man. He heard his aunt weeping in the corridor, and could not make his mouth form words to comfort her. He drifted on a black tide, and the tide carried him back, again and again, to the flooded ford, and his brother's white face turned up to the rain. And he could not tell any longer whether he was 38 or 19, whether Thomas was drowning again or already drowned, whether the water was rising over him or over them both. And in the depths of it, without knowing he did so, he called a name. Not his aunt's, not his brother's, not his mother's. He called for Rosalind. The physician heard it, and did not know who Rosalind was. The valet heard it and thought it a fever dream, some woman out of the Duke's rakish youth. But Lady Marcham, sitting grey and sleepless by the door, heard the name and rose from her chair as though she had been struck by lightning. She sent a rider that same hour, through the rain, to the small manor 12 miles off where Rosalind Hartley kept house for her widowed father. The note she sent was not a request. It was 3 lines, blotted and desperate. He is dying and he calls for you. I do not understand it, and I do not ask you to forgive it. Only come. Rosalind came. She came at 3 in the morning with her cloak soaked through and her boots ruined, and she did not wait to be announced. She went up the great stair with the water still running from her hem. And she stopped in the doorway of the death chamber where the physician stood with his sleeves rolled and his face grave, and she looked at the man in the bed, the proud Duke of Kestrelmore, who had told her he would sooner marry his horse, and she saw a thing the physician had missed, because she had nursed her mother through a like fever and her memory was long. The window, she said. How long has it been shut? The physician blinked. Madam, the patient must be kept warm. He is not cold. He is burning, and the air in this room is fouler than a byre. Open it a hand's breadth. She was already at the bedside, laying the back of her hand against Julian's cheek with a briskness that brooked no argument. And this quantity of blankets will roast him alive. Take half away. And I want cool water, not cold, cool and clean linen. And if there is willow bark in this house, I want it steeped. And if there is not, send a man to wake the apothecary in the village, and do not let him come back without it. She looked up. Not one of the servants had moved. Now, she said, quite gently, and the room came to life around her. Julian, far down in the dark, felt something change. The crushing heat eased by a breath. A cool cloth came to rest against his brow, and a hand, a small sure hand, smoothed the sodden hair back from his temple, and a voice he half knew said, Lo, I have you, sir. Be still now. I have you. And for the first time in 3 days, the Duke of Kestrelmore stopped struggling against the water and let himself be held above it. The fever broke on the 5th night, and it broke because of her. Julian did not know this yet. He knew only that he woke, at last, into a clean grey dawn, weak as a wrung cloth, his mind his own again for the first time since the field. The great chamber was ordered and quiet. The window stood open a hand's breadth to the moor air, and the curtains stirred, and the fire had been banked low and sensible. His skin was cool. His head, though it swam when he turned it, no longer burned. And in the chair by his bed, fallen sideways into an exhausted sleep with a book slid from her fingers to the floor, was Rosalind Hartley. He lay very still and looked at her. She had taken off her ruined boots at some point. Her stockinged feet were tucked beneath her. Dark hair had come half down. There were shadows beneath her eyes like bruises, and a line between her brows that even sleep had not smoothed, and her plain gown was creased past saving. She looked worn to the bone. She looked, he thought, with a strange lurch in his chest, as though she had been fighting something and had won. He tried to speak and managed only a rasp. It was enough. Her eyes opened at once, the way a mother's do, straight up out of deep sleep into full waking, and she was on her feet and at his side before he had drawn breath to try again. No, catching his wrist as he moved to rise. No, you will lie still. You have been very ill, sir, nearer gone than I care to say. You will drink this, and you will not argue, because I have not slept above 2 hours together in 5 days, and I have no arguing left in me. Her voice was flat with tiredness, but her hands, cupping his head, lifting the cup to his lips, were as gentle as anything he had ever known. The broth was warm and salted and tasted of nothing, and was the finest thing he had ever swallowed. When he could speak, he said, "Hoarse, Miss Hartley, Your Grace, why are you here?" She set the cup down. For a moment she did not answer, and he watched the wariness war with something else in her grave face. "Your aunt sent for me," she said at last, "in the night, 4 nights ago. I told you I would sooner marry my horse." "You did. A very small, very tired ghost of a smile touched the wide mouth. I have not forgotten it. Neither, I imagine, has your horse. And then the smile faded and she looked him steadily, and she gave him the truth, because she was not a woman who trafficked in anything else. You called for me, sir, in your fever, again and again. Your aunt did not understand it, and I do not understand it, and I suspect you will like it least of all of us. But you called my name as a drowning man calls, and I could not. She stopped and pressed her lips together and finished simply, I could not come. Something moved through Julian then that was not the fever. He looked away from her, at the window, at the moor going gold under the risen sun, and he could not speak for the tightness in his throat. He did not remember calling her. He remembered the water and Thomas, and the black tide, and he remembered dimly a cool hand and a low voice saying, I have you, and understood now whose hand it had been. This stranger, this grave-eyed woman he had insulted in his own gallery, had ridden 12 miles through a March night to hold a dying man above the dark, a man who had given her nothing but scorn. You should not have come, he said, and his voice cracked on it. I do not deserve that you came. No, she agreed, matter of fact, tucking the blanket. You do not. Very few of us get what we deserve, sir, and it is generally a mercy. Now sleep. The fever may yet turn. I will be here, and she was. She was there through the long, slow days of his mending, when he was too weak to lift a spoon and hated her fiercely for seeing it, and she bore his temper without so much as blinking, and fed him anyway. She was there in the black hours when the fever crept back and his mind slipped, and he wept for his brother in front of a woman he barely knew, and she did not turn away, did not soothe him with lies, only held his hand in both of hers and said, I know, I know. Grief does not drone with the one we lose. It only learns to swim. She was there when the physician wanted to bleed him again, and she stood in the doorway with her arms folded and told the man, in a voice of quiet steel, that he would open no vein in this house while she drew breath in it. And the physician, a proud man, a York man, looked at her plain grey gown and her unshakable eyes and astonishingly obeyed. Julian watched her in those days as he had never watched a woman in his life. Not for beauty, though he found, to his confusion, that he had begun to think her face the most necessary thing in any room. He watched her the way a man watches whether he has come to depend on. He learned the small economies of her. The way she pushed a fallen curl behind her ear with the back of her wrist when her hands were busy. The way she read to him in the evenings, from whatever she found on his shelves, in a low even voice that unknotted him better than any draught. The way she never once, in all those days, mentioned the gallery or the horse or the insult, as though she had drawn a line beneath it and would not have him grovel. It was that in the end that undid him, not tenderness, mercy. He had built his life on the principle that the world was a ledger and every debt was called in. And here was this woman who owed him nothing, whom he had wronged, spending herself to the bone on him and asking no coin in return, forgiving him without being asked, simply because he had needed it, made a nonsense of everything he had believed. Why do you do it? He asked her one evening, when the light was failing and she had lit a single candle and sat mending a tear in his shirt sleeve, of all humble tasks, because idle hands fretted her. You could have sent word that you had come and done your duty and gone home to your father. No one would have thought the worse of you. Why do you stay and nurse a man who called you less than a horse? She did not look up from the needle. Because you were suffering, she said, and I knew how to help, and there is no other reason a decent person needs. She drew the thread through. My mother died of a fever like yours, sir, when I was 19. I nursed her 9 weeks, and I could not save her, and I have never in my life felt so useless as I felt the night she went. When your aunt's rider came, I thought, here is a thing I might do. Here is a life I might keep from the water where I could not keep hers. Now she did look up, and the candlelight moved in her grave eyes. It was never about you at all, your grace, if I am honest. Not at first. I did it for a woman 12 years dead. A pause. It is a little about you now. I will grant you that much, and no more, for your head is swelled enough. Julian laughed, a real laugh, rusty and startled, the first in longer than he could remember, and then winced, because laughing hurt his ribs, and she said, serves you, without any pity at all, and went back to her mending, and he lay in the candlelight and looked at her bent head and understood, with the quiet finality of a key turning in a lock. that he loved her. It terrified him more than the fever had. There was, in those first days of his mending, a great deal that the household did not say aloud but understood perfectly well. The Duke of Castelmore had never in living memory permitted a soul to see him weak. He had run a fever as a young man once and locked himself away for a week rather than be waited on. That he now suffered a gentlewoman with no rank to speak of to sit at his bedside, to feed him, to scold him, to overrule his own physician. That was a thing so far outside the order of the world that the servants moved about their duties in a kind of hushed astonishment, watching sidelong, and said nothing. Julian was aware of the watching. He found to his surprise that he did not care. There is a stripping away that comes with true sickness, a burning off of vanity as fever burns off flesh, and a man who has genuinely believed himself dying does not much trouble afterward about who sees him take broth from a spoon. What he could not so easily reckon with was the change in himself that had nothing to do with weakness of the body. He had always found the company of others a labor. Even his aunt, whom he loved, he could bear only in measured doses. After an hour of any person he wanted the door shut and the room his own. It had been so all his life. He had put it down to a natural coldness in his blood, an Ashcombe trait, the same iron reserve that had let his father die railing at the plaster and his mother fade unmissed. But Rosalind he did not want to leave. When she went down to take her own meal or to write to her father, he found himself listening for her step on the stair, and when she came back the whole grey room seemed to warm by several degrees, and he could not for the life of him explain it, and it frightened him. And he wanted it never to stop. "You are frowning again," she observed one afternoon, without looking up from the account books she had commandeered from his steward, for she had discovered, in a single glance at the estate ledgers, 3 errors of arithmetic that had been costing him money for a year, and had set about correcting them with a grim relish that both amused and impressed him. "You frown when you are thinking uncomfortable thoughts. You should not think uncomfortable thoughts. It slows the blood." "I was thinking," he said, "that I do not understand you. Few people do." She turned a page. "It has never troubled me greatly. You found 3 errors in Mercer's figures. 4. The 4th is subtle. I have not decided whether it is error or theft. I will have decided by Thursday." She dipped the pen. "My father is a mathematician, sir, of some small note, and had no son, and so taught his daughter what he would have taught a boy, there being no one else to hand, and the knowledge otherwise going to waste. It is not a fashionable accomplishment. I have learned to keep it hidden at dinner tables, where a woman who does sums is thought only a less alarming than a woman who does surgery." A dry glance. "You will notice I have stopped troubling to hide it from you. I concluded, somewhere about the 3rd night of your fever, that a man who has wept in front of me for his dead brother is unlikely to faint at the sight of me adding a column of figures." Julian was silent. He had a great gift for silence, but this was not his usual armoured quiet. It was the silence of a man watching a shape he had thought he knew resolve into something wholly other. He had taken her, in the gallery, for a grave plain gentlewoman of no particular consequence. He was learning, day by day, that Rosalind Hartley was in fact one of the most formidable people he had ever met, sharper than his steward, cooler in a crisis than his physician, more stubborn than his aunt, and possessed of a clear, unsparing honesty that cut through his self-regard like a blade through smoke. She simply carried it all plainly wrapped in a worn grey gown and let the world underestimate her, and did not appear to mind. "Why do you let them?" he asked. "The dinner tables. Why do you hide it and let them think you less than you are?" Rosalind set down the pen. For a while she looked out at the moor, where the wind was combing the heather flat and silver. "Because," she said, "a woman without fortune or great beauty who is also cleverer than the men around her is not a prize, sir. She is a threat. I learned young that the world will forgive a woman a great many things sooner than it will forgive her being right. So I keep quiet, and add my father's columns in the evenings where no one can see, and I have made a kind of peace with being overlooked." She said it without self-pity, as a woman states a fact of weather. "It is not so bad a life. One sees a great deal from the corner of a room. And no one asks anything of you when they have decided you are of no account. They are fools," Julian said, and was surprised at the roughness in his own voice. "Every one of them. I was a fool with them in that gallery. I looked at you and saw a grey gown and a grave face and thought my aunt had brought me a nobody. He met her eyes. I have never in my life been so wrong about anything. Something flickered across her steady face, not quite a blush, she was too self-possessed for that, but a softening, a small crack in the armor of her composure. She recovered at once. You were feverish already, she said briskly, taking up the pen. It clouds the judgment. I shall not hold your gallery against you, since you were sickening at the time and did not know it. Now be quiet, sir. I am about to catch your steward stealing, and I require silence to do it properly. But that night, when she thought him asleep, Julian lay in the dark and watched her by the last of the candle, reading now, not working, some book of her own she had brought, her stockinged feet tucked up and a frown of concentration between her brows, and he thought of all the years he had spent behind his walls calling it strength, and of this woman who had been overlooked her whole life, and had turned even that into a kind of quiet, unbreakable dignity, and he understood that he had mistaken hardness for strength his whole life long. She was the strong one. She had been wounded as he had been wounded, the dead mother, the world that would not see her, and where he had answered it by shutting every door, she had answered it by keeping one open always, for anyone who might need what she knew how to give. Even for a proud fool who had insulted her in a gallery. He closed his eyes before she could catch him watching, and for the first time in 20 years he was not afraid of the dark, because he could hear her turning the pages of her book, and knew she would be there when he woke. There came, as such fevers will, a false dawn. On the 9th day Julian woke feeling so much stronger that he grew impatient and imperious, and against Rosaline's flat instruction he insisted on rising and dressing and going down to his study to see to estate matters he had convinced himself could wait for no one. She did not fight him past a single warning. You will pay for this, and I shall not say I told you so, because it will be self-evident, and let him go, and by afternoon the exertion and the cold study had turned on him, and the fever came roaring back in the night worse than before. And for a black 6 hours it was truly touch and go. She did not reproach him. That was the thing he remembered afterward, when he was mended enough to be ashamed. A lesser nurse, a righteous one, would have flung his own folly in his teeth. Rosalind only came the moment his valet sent for her, at 2 in the morning, in her nightgown with a shawl thrown over it and her dark hair in a plait down her back, and she took one look at his flushed, struggling face and shed no time at all on being right. She flung the window wide to the more cold. She stripped the heavy counterpane away. She set his valet to bring in cool water and wrung out the cloths herself and laid them along his throat and his wrists and his brow, and when he thrashed and cried out, for he was back in the black tide. Back at the ford, Thomas's white face turning up to the rain, she took his hand in both of hers and put her mouth close to his ear and said, over and over, in that low, even voice, "You are not there. You are here. Thomas is gone, and you could not have saved him, and it was not your fault, and you are here, and I have you. Come back now. Come back to me." And he came back. Slowly, over the worst hours of that long night, the tide receded, and he surfaced into the grey light of the 10th morning week and wrung out and alive, and the first thing he saw was Rosalind's face bent over his, grey with exhaustion, her eyes red-rimmed, her hand still fast around his. "You are a very great fool," she said, when she saw him truly awake, and her voice cracked in the middle of it, and he realized with a shock that she had been weeping, this composed, unshakable woman who had faced down his physician and his temper and his estate accounts, without a tremor had wept. In the dark over him, "You nearly died of your own pride, sir, and I nearly let you, and I have never been so frightened in all my life, and if you ever do such a thing again, I shall. She could not finish it. She pressed her free hand hard against her mouth and shut her eyes. Julian looked up at her. He was too weak to lift his head, but he turned his hand within her grip until their fingers laced together, palm to palm, and he held on. "You wept for me," he said. It was not a question. It was a thing he needed to say aloud to make it real, because it changed everything. "I am overtired," she said, wiping her eyes furiously with her wrist. "I have not slept. It signifies nothing." "You wept for me," he said again, softly, wondering, "and an hour ago you told me Thomas was not my fault, and I have carried that for 20 years and no living soul has ever said it to me. Not once. and you said it to a raving man in the dark who you thought would not remember. But I remember, Rosalind, I will remember it the rest of my life. His throat closed. You keep saving me, in every way there is, and I do not know what I have ever done to be saved by you, except be too proud and too broken to deserve it. She was quiet a long moment. Then she drew a breath and set her composure back in place like a woman lifting a heavy shawl to her shoulders and said unsteadily, "You will rest now, truly rest, this time, and let me do my work and not rise from this bed until I say you may, because I find," her voice wavered, "I find I have grown unaccountably attached to the idea of you living, sir, and I would take it very ill to lose the argument now, after all the trouble I have gone to." He held her hand until he slept, and she let him, and she did not this time draw her hand away. He was well enough to leave his bed within the fortnight, and the day he came down the great stair on his own feet, thin, grier at the temple than before, leaning on a stick he despised, was the day Rosalind announced that she would go home. "You are mended," she said, drawing on her gloves in the hall, her small trunk already carried down and waiting, "or near enough that your household can keep you from doing yourself an injury, which is the most any of us can hope for. My father has been alone a fortnight and frets." "I am glad you live, sir. I am truly glad." She held out her hand to him, plainly, as one gentleman to another. "Goodbye, your grace." Julian looked at the offered hand and did not take it. The terror was still in him. Every wall he had built since the flooded ford stood between him and the thing he wanted to say, and each stone of it whispered the old warning, "Love is a country you crossed once, and it nearly killed you. Do not enter it again. Let her go. Say the cool word, make the correct bow, and let her walk out to her carriage and be safe from you, and you safe from her, and no one drowned." He had spent his whole life listening to that voice. He was so very tired of it. "No," he said. Rosalind's brows drew together. "No? No, I will not take your hand, and no, you will not go, and if you say goodbye to me in that composed and dutiful voice, as though we were two strangers who shared a coach, I believe I shall go mad in good earnest." The words came out rough and unpracticed. He had no gift for this and knew it. He set the hated stick against the wall and stood on his own 2 feet before her, unsupported, and made himself meet those grave eyes he had not been able to stop seeing. "Miss Hartley, Rosalind, when I lay dying I called no one's name but yours. I did not know I would. I did not know your name had gone so deep in me from 1/4 hour in a gallery. But it had, and it has, and I have lain in that bed for a fortnight watching you save my worthless life and forgive me 100 times over, and I find I cannot let you walk out that door, because if you do the best thing there's ever come into this house goes with you." Her hand had lowered. She was very still and very pale, and for once, for the first time since he had known her, those steady eyes were not steady at all. "You told me," she said low, "that you would sooner marry your horse. I was a proud fool and a frightened one, and I have paid for it with a fever that nearly killed me, which seems to me a great deal too fair." He took a step toward her. His legs shook, and he did not care. "I do not offer you a title. Or rather, I do, God help me, I offer you all of it, the house and the moor and the 400 years of Ashcombe pride. But that is not what I am asking. I am asking whether a woman who nursed a man for a dead mother's sake, and stayed for his own after, might one day stay for good. Not as my nurse, as my wife, as the only creature who ever saw what was under the walls and did not run." His voice failed him, and he let it. "I am asking you to marry me, Rosalind. And I am asking it hat in hand, on my own 2 feet, in front of my whole staring household, so that no one, least of all you, will ever be able to say the Duke of Kestrelmore did not know his own heart." The great hall was very quiet. His aunt stood on the stair with her hand pressed to her mouth. The steward had gone still by the door. And Rosalind Hartley stood in her plain grey travelling gown with her ruined boots and a worn dear face, and looked at the proud man humbled before her, and Julian watched the tears come up in her eyes and stand there unfallen, exactly as her stubbornness would have them. "You are impossible," she said, and her voice was not steady at all. "You are the proudest, most exasperating, most difficult man in 3 counties, and you insulted me in your own gallery, and you called me less than a horse." "I did," he said. "I will spend the rest of my life outliving it. Give me the chance. And you cannot even take your own stick from the wall without swaying." "Then I shall need someone," said Julian, to steady me. For a long moment she only looked at him. Then, slowly, she reached out, not for the offered hand this time, but past it, laying her palm flat against his chest. Over the heart that had called her name across 12 miles of March night, he put his own hand over hers and held it there. He was shaking. So he saw was she. Yes, she said. Just that. The wide grave mouth trembled into the smile he had come to need more than daylight. Yes, you difficult man. Yes, I will steady you. I have been steadying you for a fortnight, and it seems I have grown used to it. And then, because she was Rosalind, and would not let even this moment go unweighted with truth, but you will apologize to the horse. It has been most patient, and you have slandered it grievously, and I will not marry a man who slanders a good horse. Julian Ashcombe, Duke of Kestrelmore, put back his head and laughed until his poor ribs ached, and then he drew her against him there in the great cold hall and held her, and felt her arms come round him, and for the first time since a boy died in a flooded ford 20 years before, he was not afraid of what it would cost him to love. He had already crossed that country. He knew now that a man could cross it and be brought home again, that grief did not drown with the ones we lost, but neither did love, and that the same hands that held you above the dark could go on holding you the whole way into the light. They were married in the little church below the moor before the summer was out, no grand society affair, but a quiet gathering of village and household and one weeping, triumphant aunt. Rosalind wore not grey, but the soft blue of a cleared sky, and Julian, standing at the altar without his stick, watched her come up the aisle on her father's arm and thought his heart would break with the fullness of it. He had told her once he would sooner marry his horse. He spent every day thereafter proving how wrong a proud man could be, and how far a broken one could mend. When the right pair of steady hands was willing to keep him from the water, he did apologize to the horse. She insisted, and he found, to his own great surprise, that he could refuse her nothing at all.